Hello, I'm Gabby. How's it going? Welcome to the Happier Life Project, brought to you by the free award-winning mental health and wellness app, My Possible Self. In today's episode, we are exploring how laughter is said to be the best form of medicine. Where did this phrase come from? How does it work? And how can we incorporate more funny into our life to reap the benefits? Did you know that laughter has been scientifically proven to strengthen your immune system, boost mood, diminish pain, and protect you from the damaging effects of stress? And upon doing my research, that's just scratching the surface. So, if we're going to explore laughter as therapy and laughter as medicine, then what better guest than a professional comic to help us explore this laughing matter? Josh Johnson is an Emmy-nominated writer, stand-up, actor, and NAACP award winner. He is currently a writer on The Daily Show. For our UK listeners who might not be familiar, The Daily Show is an American late-night talk and satirical news show that airs every Monday through Thursday on Comedy Central, drawing its comedy and satire from recent news stories as well as political figures and media organisations. In addition, Josh is Comedy Central's most watched comedian ever, with over 40 million views to date across their platforms. His comedy special, Up Here Killing Myself, which was released in February of this year on Peacock, and you'll hear me refer to throughout the interview, is absolutely brilliant. Josh is extremely active on YouTube, so you can check out lots of his content there too. He's got his own podcast called The Josh Johnson Show, and he voices Harry Buns, an aspiring DJ on the Disney Channel series Kif. So, ready to find a healthier, happier, merrier you? Let's get started. Josh Johnson, welcome to the Happier Life Project. Thank you so much for being our first comic on the podcast. Oh. I have been keen for a while, for longer than a while actually, to explore the theory of laughter being the best form of medicine and finding the right comic to do that with. Then I discovered you and some of the content that you have done in the past, which I'm obviously going to ask you about. Yeah, so thank you for today. Thank you for taking the time. I want to start with some fun facts on this phrase, laughter being the best form of medicine. Do you know the origins by any chance?
No, I don't.
No, okay. Well, neither did I, so I Googled. Apparently, laughter is the best medicine. The origin of the phrase is actually in the King James version of the Bible, Proverbs 17:22. A merry heart doth good like a medicine. This is the oldest version of the phrase.
Oh, wow. No, I didn't know that at all.
Yeah, so people have been considering laughter as like medicine or laughter as therapy for a long time. I'm just going to hit you up with another fun fact. In the 1300s, visionary French surgeon Henri de Mondenville, a professor of surgery, promoted the idea of treating post-operative surgery with humour. He advised telling patients jokes after an operation as a way to ease pain and speed up the recovery process.
Wow. Wow. I mean, that seems like a great idea unless the joke is very funny and they have any sort of rib issue. That is a problem.
Yeah, maybe that's where they got the phrase the side splitting.
Yes, yeah, probably.
We could be getting to like where all these old sayings have come from. Anyway, before we go further into that, because of a lot of our audience are British, they might be meeting you for the first time. Going back to your roots, where it all began, in Louisiana, was laughter always around? Did you always know that you were funny?
I didn't always know I was funny, but my grandma was very funny. And so my grandma always kept us laughing. And I think that she's someone who would always tell great stories, like really, really funny stories.
Oh, that's where you get it from.
Yeah, yeah, she's just very like quick-witted and she's very like snappy and everything. And so watching her, I feel like was a real privilege as far as who in my life was making me laugh.
Do people in Louisiana talk much about their feelings and mental health? And was that around when you were growing up? Because it's become prominent in your work now, but again, going back to the origins, do people talk to therapists and stuff?
You know, I think that just like you already mentioned, there's been this sort of, at least in the States, this explosion of people talking about therapy, people going to therapy and everything.
Yeah.
I don't feel like in the 90s that was as much of a thing. I think there was still a lot of resistance to it, especially somewhere like the South where there were people who would probably just have the notion to just pray about it or to do any sort of like old school thing in place of like a modern talk therapy or any other form of therapy. There's definitely aspects of it in my life from an early age, but I think that's because my mom had I guess you could say like a forward thinking approach to therapy and was never shying away from making sure everyone had someone to talk to. Outside of that, though, I don't really think about it as people being open as just people not being exposed to it as much yet.
Yeah,
If that makes sense.
It totally does. So I found an article written by USA Today, and it was talking about researchers at the University of Colorado ranking the funniest cities in the US. They found Chicago top of the list. And you went, didn't you, from Louisiana to Chicago?
I did. Yeah, that's where I started doing comedy and everything. And that's where I sort of began the journey.
Did you know this about Chicago, that it is apparently a funny place to be?
I had a hunch, but I didn't know these stats or anything. I watched a lot of people coming up that got their start in Chicago and then moved to New York or LA or, maybe even the UK. And I think that for the most part, it seemed like Chicago was the perfect place to start because of how it's structured. There's industry there, but there's not so much that you're in it over your head. And there's also enough opportunities to do comedy with the right ratio of comics to where it feels like there's enough to go around for everyone. And so then I felt like that could be very fertile ground to do several spots a night and to start making a little bit of money doing it once I was getting good enough to do it. So a lot of it revolved around that, like a huge amount of it did. And I think that what makes it such a funny city is that it's not just a lot of stand-ups there. There's also a huge amount of improv and sketch. And there used to be more improv schools there, but there's still more than I'd say you'd find in other cities.
Wow, that's really cool. I didn't know that about Chicago. Did you always want to be a comic?
In a sense, yes, but I didn't always know it could be a job. So I always loved comedy from the time that I was little. And I would like sneak to watch certain comics if they came on late or if I, had control of the TV or something. And I think that when I was getting older was when I was realizing that this is actually a job that people do, for a living. And that's when I think I really wanted to be a comic. But then even so, I still went to college and I still found a sort of artistic major. So I majored in lighting design and I didn't really use it except to make money doing a lot of design for plays the summer after I graduated to save up the money to move to Chicago. So in that way, it was very beneficial. But then once I moved to Chicago, I never really used it again.
And the writing as well. So you'd never had any kind of formal training in being a writer for comedy?
No. I started writing stand-up and then that was the whole like training, I guess you'd say. And so writing my own stand-up for as many shows as I could do lent itself to what I do now, which is writing a lot of stand-up and writing on different late night shows.
Right. I mean, me having some experience in the US, I know the magnitude of the shows that you're referring to. Was getting the gig as a writer and a performer on the Jimmy Fallon show, was that the big break, would you say, or did that come before?
No, I mean, I think that's definitely my first job that I got. And I think it set the stage for everything that came afterwards. So, whenever people sort of connect the dots looking backward, that is the first legitimate industry thing that I got that was like very substantial, where everyone in the States knows what it is.
Yeah.
I got some things before. I've been on some comics to watch lists and everything, but that, while I'm very appreciative of that, that is not as universally known here as a writing job on a late night show.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
probably was, my first really big thing.
And for our UK listeners' benefit, that would be like, well, we don't really have the sort of sketch within the late night show layout, if you will, or format. We don't really have that, which is a shame, as much of that sort of sketch comedy aspect. But I think of like Graham Norton and Jonathan Ross, big evening show hosts that get all the celebrities on talking about this, that, and the other. So it's huge. I mean, you can't go much higher, right? So. Was it people that enjoyed your stand-up that were like, hey, you got to come and write for us? Is that how it works when you get into like writing comedy for TV?
I mean, it works differently for every person, because there's not necessarily one uniform way to get hired. But for me, I had submitted to do stand-up on the Tonight Show, because sometimes they have those comedian guest spots, and so I had submitted to do one of those, and both the booker and the head writer really liked my tape. And so then the head writer asked my manager at the time, well, would he want to send in some jokes, just straight like writing out a packet of jokes, different things that we would need. So a couple of sketch ideas, a couple of desk piece ideas, and a couple pages of monologue jokes. And so I did that. And then I sent in that first packet and didn't hear back for maybe a week or so. And then they wanted more. And so I did another packet for them. And this time I had a little bit less time, because I guess that's more like what the job would be. Like when you actually work at one of these places, you have to produce ideas every day and write jokes every day. It's not a whole, like you have a week to do it, And so then from there, after I sent in the second packet, they brought me in and did an interview, and I got the job. And I believe that that's different than how some other people got the job. Some people came straight from SNL to Tonight Show. And so there's different avenues for every person. There's no way to be too prescriptive about it.
And when you got the gig, the full-time contract, you were going through something really tough in your personal life, weren't you? Because you shared that in Up Here Killing Myself, the comedy special that I watched, you sadly lost your father around this time. So you had this massive career, I guess, high, and then this real personal low. And in terms of, again, I think going back to the theme of the episode of laughter as therapy and laughter as medicine, how did it help you?
I mean, I think that, one of the ways that people engage in any sort of avoidance is through work. And then my work happened to be, about being funny and about making people laugh and about trying to share ideas. And so I think that in the same way that I probably leaned a little bit too much into work in the form of avoidance or as a tool for avoidance, I think that it also helped me process most of what was happening, because I was talking, at least in stand-up, was talking exactly about what was happening and how I was feeling. But then also at Tonight Show, I was writing jokes that would hopefully make, a couple million people laugh. And so that was also something that I could take to heart, that my dad could be proud of, or that I could be happy that I was doing. And it's, one of my biggest dreams was to be able to engage as many people as possible with my jokes. And so in two forms, I was doing that, even though I was going through this really rough time.
It's quite amazing that you could do that, because I think some people would, the last thing they would feel like is like having a laugh, But then can you separate and just turn on the sort of creative work mode, like a musician maybe would turn to their art in a similar way?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a
Yeah.
misconception that because a comic is funny or can be funny, that they're also having a good time. You know, it's like if I know this joke works, and so I can say the joke, and it either has an element of surprise or an element of recognition in it that makes you laugh. Maybe it's something that you've always thought but nobody's put to words yet. And in those cases, I think that yes, it's very easy to then assume that because I'm making you laugh, that I am also having a good time. But I think that there's a more formulaic approach to how certain jokes are written, especially like monologue jokes, or if a story is funny and you tell it with the right enthusiasm, that can also be mistaken as like he's having so much fun telling this story that he must also be having the time of his life, you know. And I think that to your point, like a musician can write a song because they understand song structure and they maybe, you know, have a feeling that they can put in the lyrics. But on any given day that they're singing the song, let's say it's a sad song, it doesn't mean that they're depressed. They just know the song they're singing.
Right. Yeah. And I suppose to your point as well, something that has been, I've looked at in many articles is that a lot of comics do struggle with their mental health, depression and addiction being sort of top of the list of struggles there. In your like opinion and in what you've seen, just being part of the industry, why do so many comics struggle with these mental health problems, do you think?
I definitely can't fully speak to addiction just because addiction usually, even though it's a sort of masking agent for a deeper issue, I've never taken drugs, but it does seem like, at least to the mind and the body, when you're on drugs, that drugs are pretty awesome. So it is hard to both turn down the fun of the drugs in the moment and just address the masking that you were using the addiction for. That's a tall order to ask of any person. And so that's my outside perspective on what creates and sustains addiction. But for depression, I think that there's something to be said for like, I don't know if there's anything healthy about being deeply, deeply analytical all the time. I don't know if it can't somehow lead to at least being a bummer to yourself when you're alone, if that makes sense. And so I think that there is something about how you are taking your deepest thoughts, the things that you, yes, think are funny, but also the things that you actually feel. You are putting them on display for the strangers. There's no sort of misinterpretation that can take place the way that there can be in music. Because in music, if someone is deeply depressed and writes a song about their depression, but it has a nice beat, it could be played in a club and people could dance to it because they don't, maybe they're not paying attention to what the actual message of the song is. Whereas with comedy, it's like, yes, you can laugh with a little bit of misunderstanding of what the person's trying to say. There can be a veiled messaging in a joke, but for the most part, you have to get the joke to get the joke, you know? And so if you took all the things that you think and feel and gave it to the world, most often for free, and the world either rejects it or just simply doesn't understand it, that's a very depressing feeling to begin with. And I also think that the type of mind that's good at writing jokes and good at poking out where the humor is also the type of mind that, maybe this isn't a fair summarization of it, but I think that that's also the type of mind that is going to look at a general situation that other people are also looking at with a little bit more gloom, if that makes sense. Because I think that for the most part, you have to look at what we're all looking at and find something funny about it. I think you can't just turn that on and off. I think that same person looks at the same thing that we're all looking at and finds something depressing about it or finds something really scary about it. And so the thing about being analytical, which is what I think almost all of the great comics are, is that there is something sad about that, about being the only person that sees the world the way that you see it. Not saying that everyone doesn't have some form of unique perspective, but I think that it's very easy to feel like this sort of island when you do stand up, especially if you're struggling.
God, the sad irony then, it's you're making people laugh. Meanwhile, internally, you might feel the complete opposite of. I want to go back to your stand-up special, Up Here Killing Myself. I mean, it was great, first of all. I absolutely loved it.
Thank you.
Such an amazing storyteller. I think actually you can, if you've got Apple TV, I think you can access it there.
You might be able to, because it's on Peacock in the States, so I'm not totally sure how people get a hold of it when they are not in
the States. Yeah,
in the States. Yeah,
I loved it, and I thought your sense of humor and your way would really resonate with British folks.
I mean, I'd like to think so. I've been to the UK once, and I plan on coming back as many times as possible, as soon as possible, because I really did enjoy it. And I think that, I want to explore more of, I guess, both what meshes well with a British audience, but also I think that having that sort of experience with the other audiences, whether it's connecting or not, is going to open up your perspective a bit more to write jokes that will.
Yeah, well, that's fair. Going back to that, actually, in terms of the topics that you covered in Up Here Killing Myself, grief, trauma, poverty, the pandemic, dating, feeling different, gratitude, it was all stuff that I think is quite universal. And then going back to what you were saying about like finding the funny in those moments that, weren't very funny, like the pandemic or whatever, in terms of taking those topics and packaging it in a way where it sort of goes from you in a therapy office talking to your therapist to you going on stage, like the whole concept of tackling these issues and positioning it in the way that you did in terms of like going to therapy. Where did the idea come from? Why did you want to make a show in this way?
I think it's because that's the way that it most organically happens, if that makes sense. Where, some people have said that comedy is their therapy or doing stand-up is their therapy and everything. I don't think it's in any way a replacement for actual therapy with an expert. I think that the whole point of doing stand-up is to be funny. So I think that when people take on too much of the angle of how it can be therapeutic to air out everything that they're feeling, and they haven't actually written jokes or are telling a story for a specific reason, I think that then it becomes a little bit just too self-indulgent. And I think that audiences can tell when you're doing one or the other. And I also feel like when you are doing therapy, I at least, anytime I've been in therapy, have had the sort of inclination to sort of break whatever tension's being built with my therapist by being a little bit funny. Because I think it is hard to just tell someone how you feel and let that hang in the air, or tell someone what happened or what you're scared of and just let that sit. So sometimes I would follow up with something that was wholly unnecessary, but I thought was funny, or a funny aspect of why I was feeling this way. And so the way that it happened is the way that the audience sees it. So I would start out the conversation or the idea speaking in therapy because I don't know how I feel about it. And I don't know what I think about it. But then we cut to me on stage finishing the joke, which is then me deciding how I feel about it and having processed the thing and ready to share it with people. And so I worked with Jacob Menacci for it, who directed it. And that was something we talked about, where it feels like the best pairing, the most complete analogy to start some of the stories or some of the jokes in therapy, finishing them on stage, because that's just how it played out in real life.
You said as well that like some people cry, some people, scream, get mad, but you tell jokes as a way to process something that's gone on. So was it cathartic then, putting the show together, or was it more challenging because you did, talk about some serious subjects that I listed earlier?
Yeah, I mean, talking about my dad was probably the most difficult thing. Everything else I felt like was a bit therapeutic, and anybody that does stand up and anybody who does shows, like let's say, the people who go to Edinburgh and everything, they have a new show every year or so. Anyone who performs, whether you're an actor or, a comedian or anything, knows what it's like to have to let go of a piece. So maybe you're an actor and you've been in a play that's been running for several weeks, and this is the last week, and you have to say goodbye to this character in some form. You're not going to perform it this way with these people again. And so it's a way of having a sort of farewell. And then for anyone who writes a show and doesn't get to do that show anymore, or doesn't feel like they can do that show anymore, having their last couple performances with it is something special and a way to book in the journey that was writing all of it, putting all of it together, combing through your experiences to make a piece and then having to let it go. And so for me, shooting the special and putting it out it was my experience of how to say goodbye to these jokes and how to share these stories that I finally felt ready to tell, and how to sort of move on from the place I was at when I started the project to present.
And they're all, and they can live on. People can check them out. I know, like, we can't get Peacock TV in the UK, but I would suggest to anybody listening to this to try Apple TV. We'll get to doing all the plugging as we wrap things up, but flipping over to the other side now, I'm sat in the audience, from the audience perspective, and again going back to laughter as medicine. So I want to talk about like laughter and why it makes us feel so good. And I'm going to be a bit geeky on you now and share some more research. Okay. This is an article on CNN about laughter being therapy for the mind and body. By activating the neural pathways of emotions such as joy and mirth, laughter can improve your mood and make your physical and emotional response to stress less intense. For example, laughing may help control brain levels of the neurotransmitter serotonin, similar to what antidepressants do. By minimizing your brain's response to threats, it limits the release of neurotransmitters and hormones such as cortisol that can wear down your cardiovascular, metabolic, and immune systems over time. Laughter is kind of like an antidote to stress, which weakens these systems and increases vulnerability to diseases. I'm pretty sure that when you're, writing your jokes or you're on stage, you're maybe not thinking about that, but like, how does it make you feel when you see an audience looking at you laughing at your jokes?
I definitely feel like it's my best form and the first form that I found in a substantial way to communicate with people. I feel like when I was young, I did not relate to people that well, couldn't communicate that well. And so when I found comedy, that was a way of sharing my ideas in a way that felt like I was making sense to everyone. And so that's kind of what I get out of it, on top of making people laugh. And there's something about kind of like, your fact from before. It's like when you laugh, you feel no pain. Like there's a moment that you forget about everything so you can laugh, even if you're laughing at the thing that is causing you pain at the moment. And so when I'm doing a show and we're all in sync, I feel like it's a very unique experience to have with a bunch of strangers, that I'm able to tell them this story. I'm able to joke about whatever thing I'm talking about. And that if I feel like we're all getting it at the same time, that's a beautifully communal experience. It's something that people usually have to go to church to find, or go to, some sort of like community event or anything. And then even in those aspects, you have to then find your specific tribe that shares your values and everything, so that you feel like you can have this communal experience. Whereas with a comedy club, you can just have it by nature of being open to laughing at some jokes. And so you can really have like the night of your life with a bunch of strangers, and it be just as fulfilling as like working your whole life to find the specific cause that is stationed in your like local area that you can go to, that you can all talk and feel seen and understood by each other. So I feel like it's, if anything, it is a shortcut to some of those same feelings of community.
And this is making me think of another line you said in Up Here Killing Myself, where you said right at the end that it saved your life. Was this, when you're talking about comedy, was this performing, like being on stage and being part of that community, which you so beautifully described just now?
Yeah, I mean, it has a bit of double meaning in there because I think that therapy both saved me from having darker approaches to life events, and then comedy also saved my mind and my efforts from getting lost, or just giving me a means of purpose and a way of channeling everything, so it's like
Yeah.
I think therapy gives you an outlet to just express, and then comedy gave me at least an outlet to express and be a benefit to someone else for it. When you go to therapy, the reason you're paying your therapist, or at least your insurance, is because this is like very little benefit to them to just be listening to your problems. But then if you can make your problems funny and you're telling them to a bunch of strangers and it actually makes their day, then that's now all of a sudden you're being both useful to yourself and society by having a sort of marriage of a meshing of these two things. And so that's what I meant by it when I was saying it.
Right. Does that help then you tackle, because life is super I don't need to tell you this. Life is super stressful for most people now, isn't it? I mean, coming out of the pandemic and then, a war and then another war, and then, economically people are like really, really struggling. Finding the funny in those challenging moments. And there was, again, from what I watched, you do a great job of giving some examples of that, especially when with your upbringing, and you talk about not having very much money and finding the humor in that. And do you think people need to do that more? Have we, like, again, and this is more like zooming out, do you think that we need to like laugh at the absurdities? Well, laugh at how I'm trying to say the word. Laugh at the shit that life throws at us. Let's put it that way.
Sure. I mean, I don't know if it's for me to prescribe how anybody should feel about their situation, but I think that has worked for me, and I think that that's what I try to help people engage in when I'm up there talking about anything. So when I do talk about politics, I'm usually talking about it from an angle of not you should be doing this thing right now. I'm not doing a rallying cry to start a revolution. I'm more just poking fun at the fact that things got this bad somehow, and who knows, maybe some of it's our fault for not being more engaged, but I think a lot of it is the fault of the people who said they take care of it. And I don't think that is I don't think that's an unfair way to summarize the state of the world, especially in any democracy. It's like, well, you're also the people who said you take care of it. So you made promises. So then it is our job to hold you to keeping those promises. But I find that most of whether you want to call it pain and suffering or dissatisfaction that people feel in a country can usually be laid at the feet of a government that is either not doing what they promised to do or willfully ignoring the will of the people. And I think that more often than not, wherever you go in the world, most people want the same things. And those things are not too much to ask. If we can live in peace, and if we can have a little piece of the world that we can feel like is our own, not necessarily for ownership, but for just some form of shelter and safety. Those are not crazy things for any person to want or to ask for. And the way that people explain not giving them or providing them, especially when we see how many resources most, governments have at their feet, I think that deep absurdity is funny. I think it is funny. It's to me, it's funny to address how even a local government could be like, guys, I'm very sorry, we're bankrupt, but I will see you when I get back from vacation in the Bahamas. It's like, that's wow, okay, in my face as well. Ooh, you're brave. That's crazy. And so I think that for the most part, yes, it's important to have some form of levity, but also I get how when you are very close to a situation, when you're in the middle of it, you might not be able to find it as easy, which is why I've made it my job to try, because I don't put it on every individual to have the sort of mindset of a comedian. I think if they did, nothing would get done. So I think it's much better for everyone to sort of live their path as they see fit, and I'll try to make them laugh along the way.
Wow. I mean, yeah, that will really strike a chord with a lot of people, what you just said there, Josh. You've just had Thanksgiving. When this episode goes out, we'll be very close to Christmas, and then we're starting a new year. How do we incorporate more fun and funny into the next year, do you think? Where do we seek it? Because I think this is a good opportunity to remind people to try and seek it out, because it will help you therapeutically, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one way is remembering, not in the sad way that every day could have been worse, but it is genuinely funny how bad some days can be, like how many things can be toppled on, almost like a schedule of bad things happening in one day. And when those don't happen, I think it's easier to look at how things could have gone and have a laugh about how ridiculous the situation ended up being. But I think that not getting too involved in news that you can't control is one way to have a lot more levity to your life. You know, I read about the news in different places all the time for work and for a better understanding of how the world works. But I'm very aware of what I can help with and what I can't. And so I think as much as you might be inclined to try to save the entire world or the entire country or anything, if you can focus on yourself, your family, and your local community, I think that those are three things that are within reach enough that you can have an impact on. Not saying it'll be perfect, but I think that while the world does need a lot of help, I think that there's definitely something to be said for only even engaging in affecting change where you can. And then if everyone does that, we far more quickly reach a better world. And I think that in a better world, it is easier to laugh more. And I think that when you set your goals out for what you can accomplish, which is improving yourself, taking care of your family, taking care of the strangers that are your neighbors, right? When you've done all of that and that's what you set out to do, it's much easier to feel accomplished and like you're having an impact. And when you have those feelings, I think it's easier to engage in everything that is good about the world. You know, if you're trying to bring world peace all by yourself, then yeah, you're going to be pretty depressed for quite a while.
Who knew a comic could be so wise, Josh?
Oh, that's very kind. I was not funny, which was not a great display for me wanting people to check me out.
No, we're going to point to all of that. There's a signature, I suppose, sign off for the new season of the pod, which is the last 5 in 5. This is more like quick fire 5 questions, the same questions that we ask every guest. Before we get to that, though, again, because of, you know, when this episode is going out, have you got a favourite, like, Christmas movie that makes you laugh?
The Friday After Next really does it for me. It's one of the Friday movies in the franchise. So there's the movie Friday, Next Friday, and Friday After Next takes place during Christmas.
Okay, I've not heard of it.
Oh, it's wild. It doesn't surprise me that it has not made it over, but it's a great movie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Mine's Elf, by the way.
Oh, Elf. Yeah. Yeah. Classic.
Yeah, exactly. Classic. Okay, time for the Happier Life Project / 5 in 5. When and where are you at your happiest?
I think doing a show really is one of the best feelings. And then outside of that, just time with family, you know?
Mm. What's your favourite thing to do that nourishes your mental health?
I read comic books. And so if I feel very accomplished, right, I will take some time to myself, not worry about anything else, not look at the phone or anything. And I will read a comic that I've been saving, because I don't know if this is the healthiest thing, but I definitely save the books that I want to read all at one time. So I'll just be like, okay, I'm going to have these 2-3 hours to read, and I'm going to get as far as I can, not even for the goal of finishing, but just for the goal of like being able to engage in the story deeply, you know?
I love that. What piece of advice do you now know that you wished somebody would have told you earlier that would have made you a happier person?
I say it a lot now, actually, but I think if you can be equal parts persistent and patient towards a goal, you will much more likely get there. So I think that you have to be patient enough to know that everything doesn't come to you at once. And even if it did, you might not know what to do with it, but you have to be persistent enough that you're engaging in that daily work that's chipping away at whatever it is that you want. And so rather than hoping it happens or being scared it might not happen, if you can make a daily or just a daily practice or an understanding of being equal parts persistent and patient to whatever it is that you want, then you're much more likely to get there, and you will enjoy the journey much more.
That is such a good message. As again, going back to like time of year where people are thinking about what they want to achieve. What is the most important one thing that needs to change to make the world a happier place?
Having a shared understanding that you don't need to have excess in order to not lack, right? Because even when you talk to very, very high earners in the States, people making like $500,000 a year, they still don't feel rich. And that has always blown my mind. I understand that they're not millionaires, right? But when you look at the world at large and you look at the dollar and how the dollar stacks up to every other currency, and you make 500,000 of those a year, and you're still like, I'm just trying to get by. I think that tells you everything you need to know about why so few have so much and are not willing to not only not share it, but will steal and cheat and lie to get it, you know?
Yeah, true that. Finally, what is a simple, actionable first step that we can take when it comes to incorporating laughter as medicine or therapy into our lives that will help us on our journey to building a happier life?
I think finding a comedian or a show or a friend that you find funny and just spending that time with them. You can spend the time with the comedian either by going to a show or watching something that they put out. You can watch a show and that supports the people who made that show, and you can spend time with a person in person, and then that not just supports your relationship with that person, but you get the benefit of being around someone who is very funny.
Brilliant. Well, that's the perfect segue to let people know how they can find more on you. So obviously you've got a website, joshjohnsoncomedy.com. And we do have US listeners as well, so it's worth mentioning that you are going on tour. Was it the sophomore tour? Is it? I'm sure. Yeah, sophomore season tour.
Yeah.
So that kicks off early January. And you've got your own podcast, The Josh Johnson Show. And then Instagram is Josh Johnson Comedy, and same for YouTube too. Have I missed any areas we need to mention?
That was it. I think for the most part, you can also catch me on my YouTube channel, which is also, like you said, Josh Johnson Comedy. And I upload new stand-up there weekly as much as I can as possible. And if I ever, fall behind or miss a week, I usually upload a bit more the next week or something. So that's where you can find what I'm doing currently.
Awesome. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. No, I appreciate you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Happier Life Project with me, Gabby Sanderson. Now for the important housekeeping. If you are suffering with your mental health, there is a crisis button on the My Possible Self app, which will signpost you to the correct information for immediate expert advice. Those of you who are listening on one of the podcast platforms, the My Possible Self app is completely free to download and you can access all of its content, so you don't need to worry about it costing you anything. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the interviewer, which is me, and the interviewees. The content of this podcast should not be considered as a substitute for professional or medical advice. I do want to stress that laughter as medicine is a saying. Please do not take us too literally. And the primary healthcare are not involved in the production or content of this podcast. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review if you found this episode helpful. And to find and follow us on social media, if you're not already there, we are at My Possible Self, and I've been at Radio Gabby. Do take care, and I'll see you on the next one.